Just thinking about it. Okay.
Yay!
All right. We are live.
Yay.
Good.
Actually, I should pull up YouTube, which I haven't done.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just realized the same thing. Like, how many times have we done this now? And I never remember to pull up YouTube before we start. Okay.
I should close some of these tabs. Oh, I keep closing my door, but my internet is always better when my door is open.
Isn't that so weird? Like, I know it shouldn't matter, but I sometimes have the same problem.
Yep. So, and oops, I didn't mean to close that, but that's okay. I can get it back. My internet is especially prone to like, that's not going to help me find your channel, is it? My internet is especially prone to freezing. So if I freeze, just, let me know.
Okay. I understand. Yeah, mine's been having some issues too lately. And I had kind of this moment of panic right before I sent you guys the link where I connected to the Wi-Fi and it was like 1 bar. And I'm like, that's not supposed to happen. So
Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, it's like my computer doesn't know what internet is sometimes. And then then I reconnected and now it's fine. So I'm hoping it's gonna be okay, but there's always some technical issues. It's fine. That's, it's a live experience. That's what makes it exciting.
There you are.
Okay.
And cool. I got the tab open. That took an unusual amount of time.
Good.
Yeah.
I just need it to get so I can mute it. There we go. That's wrong. That's the wrong button.
See. Great. I usually bring tea to these live shows, but rules don't apply in the quarantine, so.
Do what you gotta do.
I just have water because I'm basic like that.
I have water too.
That's good. Staying hydrated and also having fun.
Good.
Alrighty. And I should have... It's not showing the comments quite yet. We have somebody... Why is it not showing the comments?
Oh, did you switch from private chat to live comments?
Yeah, I did. Maybe
that's weird.
Maybe I need to do the demonstration.
I see them.
Oh, you see them?
Yeah, well, you have to be on the YouTube page to see. Well, Kara shouldn't have to be on the YouTube page to see it, but like you and I would have to be on the YouTube page to see it.
Right.
So
I might just have to answer comments from the YouTube page, which is very weird.
Well, comments are like a couple of minutes behind usually.
Okay, now they're showing up. I wonder if that's what happened.
Okay.
Alrighty, we should be good then. All right, so we'll wait a few more minutes for people to show up.
Where'd it go?
I should probably grab, because I listen to Pride and Prejudice on audiobook, but I like having the physical book near me, so ignore my pajama pants.
That's all right.
Okay. I actually went out and bought a new version of Pride and Prejudice for this because I want a version where they all match, and it's a nice version, so I've got a nice version of it.
I know. I like the vintage classic ones. I think are super pretty, and I just like the size of them.
I got the Every Man's Library edition, so I get you get that, and I like how it's laid out because there's still room for me to like write stuff in the comments or in the margins, and it's not like that on a lot of the smaller paperbacks. So, all right, I was looking. That's not what I'm looking for.
Ready. Yeah, Taylor, I was telling Margaret before we started, like, this is the only book so far that I haven't tabbed anything because I feel like I can pretty much recall any of the scenes I want to talk about. Like, I have read this book an absurd number of times, so
really,
I feel pretty confident about that, but
that's good.
I haven't. Let's see. I don't know how many times I've read it, but I've definitely read it quite a few. I don't have a number.
Yeah. I know for the longest time, this was the only Jane Austen book I had read. Like, I knew she had others, but I just kept rereading Pride and Prejudice, like, for years.
Quality.
That's what I would do, so.
Let's see. I've read Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, I think, the most. I think all of the other ones I've read at least once over the years. I didn't get to Northanger Abbey until, like, last year.
Really?
Yeah. I think
Northanger Abbey is an underrated one.
It is.
Yes,
I think Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park are the ones that I read last.
Yeah,
I still haven't read
Mansfield Park. Is underrated.
Mansfield
Park is very quiet, so people dislike it, but I love it because I am Fanny Price.
Alrighty. So looks like we have a few people watching. Some of them are probably us, but that's okay. Okay, so what do you guys think about just starting with the introductions, and that way people still have, like, they still have a couple minutes to start watching before we get into the book. So we're going to do what Taylor started in our first live show, which I had just copied shamelessly because I think it's a good way to start. Also, I want to mention that we were going to have another guest join us, Kayla, and she actually had to cancel. So we're sorry that she missed it, but luckily we still have Margaret here from The Word Nerd. So we're going to start with Margaret, and go ahead and introduce yourself briefly. You can plug your channel a little bit, talk about what do you normally talk about on your channel, and end with your experience with Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen in general. And then we'll do the same with Taylor and I.
Okay, well, that is a story. So hi, I'm Margaret. I have the channel The Word Nerd. I talk about YA fantasy primarily, although I do read some like mystery thriller stuff and comic books and sci-fi. So if you're looking for those things, my channel is a good one to check out. I actually found out, like, my first experience for Pride and Prejudice was I went to a friend's house because my mom was picking something up at their house, and as moms do, she started talking with their mom, and they were watching Pride and Prejudice. And so basically, I think I ended up spending the night and watching the entire BBC Pride and Prejudice.
Yes.
That is how I was introduced to it. And then I read the book very shortly after. I was like 16.
Very cool.
So good.
All right. Taylor, want to go ahead?
Okay. So I'm Taylor. I have a channel, PageScreenTaylor. I post semi-regularly, but I'm trying to get back into posting. I do a lot of bookish-related videos. I'm trying to bring more films into that, but who knows? So my experience with Pride and Prejudice is that I was about 14, 15, and I had already read and watched the Sense and Sensibility book and film adaptation. I watched the Keira Knightley version of Pride and Prejudice, fell in love with it, read the book when I was 16, fell in love with the book, and this is my second time reading it, and I'm surprised I haven't read it more because it makes me all happy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'm Kara from Wild Book Garden. On my channel, I read a lot of different genres. I read across all age ranges. I think, like, I've been reading especially a lot of middle grade lately, and my favorite genres are fantasy and historical fiction, but like I said, I read kind of a bit of everything just about. And my experience with Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice, I've kind of mentioned this the last couple live shows, but my sister and I, like, grew up with Jane Austen. My mom is a huge Jane Austen fan, so that was something that was, like, bred in us from a very young age. I honestly don't remember a time when I didn't know the story of Pride and Prejudice. Like, we must have watched that BBC miniseries. I'd be surprised if it was under 100 times. Like, we watched it a lot because it was also what we would watch when one of us was feeling sick. Like, we'd be on the couch and that was our, like, comfort food watch. And then it was a few years before I actually read Pride and Prejudice myself, and I fell in love with it. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the live stream, I pretty much only read Pride and Prejudice for a while. It wasn't until a few years after that I started reading Austen's other books. And And yeah, like I really love rereading her work. I feel like I notice new things about it every time, or I appreciate new things every time, which I'm a huge fan of rereading. So that's something that is really exciting for me about it. And yeah, big fan of Pride and Prejudice. If people ask me my favorite Austen, my like basic bitch answer is Pride and Prejudice. Like I just really love it.
I feel like that's everyone's answer though, because Pride and Prejudice is one of her like most enduring works.
Right. It's like what people think of, I think, when they think of Jane Austen. Like even people who don't know anything about her or about her other books, they know what Pride and Prejudice is. Yeah. Okay. So now that we've all introduced ourselves, one of the things I want to talk about first, or have you guys talk about first, is kind of like the general, I think what people probably think of when they think of Pride and Prejudice, and that is like the romance and like the development of that and how that affects the story. Because I think Pride and Prejudice is interesting in that most of the story is about Lizzie and Darcy and like their interactions and their relationship. But in universe, the most important thing to all the characters is Jane and Bingley. Like they're kind of the main characters like in the book, but most of the readers I think don't see it that way. At least from what I've heard from other people, it kind of reminds me of Much Ado About Nothing, where like Hero and Claudio, like Hero and Claudio are the main characters, but everyone's there for Beatrice and Benedict. So anyway, just like general thoughts about the book and especially about the romance and that development.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that the romance is the thing that people remember the most about Pride and Prejudice, because I'm reading it and like I've known this every time, but like it's really striking me this time that like the romance is so understated. There's not a lot of it. Like what I am used to and what you look for. This isn't actually a romance novel. It's a contemporary like what's the contemporary kind of like issue books. It's a contemporary issue book almost, because the focus is like social standing and marriage. It's not actually the romance between Lizzie and Darcy that actually plays into it and is like a key part of it. But there's so very little of it, especially at the beginning.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I have a friend who always complains that Pride and Prejudice is too romantic, and I'm like, where? There's barely any romance. It's more talked of than is like explicitly shown on the page. And it's more about the characters themselves and the relationship to each other rather than an overall romantic relationship.
Yeah.
And I kind of like it that way.
Me too. Yeah.
I could do with more kissing, but that's just me.
There's fan fiction for that.
That's what the Keira Knightley version is for.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. It is very understated. And another thing I think is so interesting, and that it's not that I forget this every time, but kind of like Margaret, you were saying, it's like I need it to be reminded of this every time, is like Darcy is interested in Elizabeth from pretty much the beginning of the book. And it's like she doesn't start even paying attention to him until like halfway through.
Well, she doesn't start being into him, but that was okay. So I just want to point out that there's a part where it talks about how he thinks of her with complacency, and that just made me laugh. I was like, yes, complacency is exactly how every girl wants to be thought of by the eventual love of her life.
Yeah. And it's so funny because we get those little like chunks of the book that are almost from Darcy's perspective, like kind of third person sort of. And it's so funny, like seeing him like start to have feelings about Elizabeth, and he hates it. He's like, get this out of here. Like, I do not want this. And one of the things that really cracked me up is like, because obviously he makes a bad first impression on Elizabeth. The first time she hears him talk about her is he's saying like, she's not pretty enough to dance with and all of this. He's socially just awful. And the thing that like cracked me up about it is later their interactions, like she just gives him like a total smackdown and like walks away, and Darcy just kind of stands looking after her like, damn, that's hot. Like that's it. That's like
yeah. It's funny. The first half of the book, this time it's hit me a lot more that Lizzie really is giving Darcy a harder time than he deserves.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest. Like, I'm sitting there, like, that famous dance scene, which is so romantic in the 2005 version. I don't think you can do that dancing badly, but like it's so iconic in the 2005 version, movie version. Like she starts conversation because she wants to torment him, and I'm just like, I mean, I know he said you weren't pretty, but that's not worth like continually trying to goad and heckle him. Yeah. So, I mean, the lady doesn't protest too much.
I think one of the reasons that, like, for modern audiences, like, one of the reasons I think that we tend to be, I guess, more on Darcy's side with it is, like, a lot of the behavior that everyone considers so rude and unforgivable is, like, he just seems like an introvert. Like, you know, like, when he's saying things like, I hate dancing with people I don't know, and he just, like, stands awkwardly in the corner the whole time, I'm like, this is an introvert stuck at a party. Like, that's what he's doing.
He's an introvert with no filter is what it is. Because, like, there's some stuff that I'm just like, dude, maybe you shouldn't have said that. But, like, I think, I definitely relate with Darcy a little more. So if he hadn't have opened his big mouth, people probably wouldn't have cared as much if he hadn't have, like, been like, oh, she's tolerable.
Yeah. Or the whole any savage can dance. Like, okay, Darcy, calm down.
Yeah. I know. I think there's a good balance of, like, he still does some things where it's like, that's not, like, I'm not, like, excusing everything he does because he is so awkward. And I don't think we're supposed to, but it is funny that a lot of the like signs that people don't like him or that he's like not a good like not a good member of society is like, these are things that we wouldn't think anything of. Like,
yeah, I think it's a lot more emblematic of the times then, because you were always supposed to be like on and always very sociable and pleasant, and Darcy is, like many introverts, can come off as kind of an ass because he's shy.
I'm not gonna lie, I feel like that's still kind of a as an introvert, that's still kind of a thing that people expect of you, is to always be like happy to socialize, and you're like, no, I've had too many people today, thank you, bye.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes Darcy's character development satisfying for me, which is actually the next thing I wanted to talk about, and we already kind of started on this, one of the things that makes it really satisfying for me is that I feel like his arc in this book is about showing the difference between, like, being a good person but not treating people kindly on an individual basis versus, like, you're a good person and you also make an effort to just, like, be generally, like, a decent human being, if that makes sense. Like, because he has that line later where he's like, I was given good principles but left to follow them in pride and conceit. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to point out. Like, he's not a bad person, I don't think. Like, he actually does quite a bit of good. Like, by the standards of the day, he would have been considered like, oh, you treat your servants so much better than you need to, like, all of this. So I think it's interesting that, like, he is a good person, but there's still this emphasis placed on, like, okay, but being rude to people just because you can is, like, also not okay, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's less that he thinks of himself being rude, and more that, like, he thinks, like, his perception of him being acceptable in society and being polite and being what he expects of a gentleman is, so it's removed from what's actually being put out there. So it takes someone else from the outside going, hey, like, you're not actually being a gentleman right now. For him to be like, oh crap, I need to rethink my stuff. And that's, for me, what makes him a good person and a good love interest, is because the minute Elizabeth is like, hey, you've got issues, he's like, okay, I'm gonna think about this. Heck, she's right. Like he actually is like, I'm going to make the effort to change. And I think that that's kind of a hallmark of someone who is a good person and a good role model, is someone who's like, when they're brought to task, they don't sit there and automatically deny it. They go and they sit with it and they think about it, and then they change their behavior accordingly.
Yeah. And what I also like about,
sorry, go ahead, Taylor.
Oh, no. I was just going to add, what I also love is that he doesn't change with the hopes of getting Lizzie back. He does it because he wants to be a better person. And that's what I also like. Like, he's not just doing this for her. He's doing it because she helped him realize that what he was doing wasn't acceptable.
Yes, I agree. I think that's one of the most important things about his character development, is that it's not based on hoping that he can win her over. It's like separate from the fact, like, I'm sure he is still hoping that, you know, his changed behavior might make her think better of him, but I don't think he's ever, like, he's not like holding his good behavior hostage, basically, for her to, like, to want to be involved with him. And then any other thoughts you guys have on Darcy's arc? Or I also want to talk about Lizzie's character development, because that's something I've been noticing a lot more on this reread. Like, I think Darcy has the really obvious character arc, but I've also I feel like Lizzie, she goes through quite a bit of change in this book too. So I want to hear what you guys, like, if you guys agree with that. Do you think she changes significantly, or what?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
I think it's a little bit more subtle, because her, like, everything that she does to some extent is justified. Like, I don't fault her for believing Wickham when he was, like, telling her the story, because everything she knows about Mr. Darcy corroborates that. And, like, how many times have we heard something about someone and been like, oh, wow, they really, and not gotten the other side of someone's story. So I feel like her stuff, like, I don't think either of them make any huge, horrible sins, but I feel like her stuff is more just her going, like, oh, I was wrong about this one person, or these couple of people, like, I perceived them incorrectly, and having to adjust that, than it is about having to be like, oh, I am a dick and I need to stop.
Yeah.
I feel like Lizzie's arc is really about realizing that she's not an infallible judge of character. You know, that she makes snap judgments about people just like other people do. And I'm glad you brought up the Wickham thing, Margaret, because one of the things that I find really interesting about that is that later, after she hears Darcy's side of the story and realizes who Wickham really is, Elizabeth has that moment of, like, realizing, oh, like, he was charming, so I believed him. Like, you know, she kind of is forced to realize that she's not this this totally neutral party, like she kind of prided herself on being. Which I think that's one of the reasons I find Elizabeth a really likable character, is that she's not perfect, and she also kind of has to admit when she's wrong, like Darcy did. And even though it's on a much more, like we were saying, it's on a much more, like, interpersonal scale, or like an individual basis, I think it's nice that they both kind of have that mirrored character development throughout the novel.
Yeah. And I also really like the sort of mirroring and how Lizzie perceives Darcy as sort of vain and prideful, and how she also doesn't realize that Jane can come across as indifferent and reserved. Just, you know, the people who know Darcy know that he's a good guy, and the people who know, like Lizzie, who know Jane, knows when she is into someone or attracted to someone. And so I really like that sort of, the events that unfold in the book sort of bring that to light for her.
Yeah, definitely. We have a comment from Naomi. She says that Lizzie has to evaluate how she treats people in light of her assumptions. And I think that's a really good point, because it's not just that Lizzie makes these judgments about people in her head, but she kind of contributes to like the gossip about these different people. Like, she's the one who kind of starts, she doesn't, like, start the rumor, but she kind of solidifies her town, like, dislike of Darcy by, like, talking about what he did to Wickham, supposedly. So I think that's a really good point, is that it's not just, like, she has to kind of recognize later that, like, oh, like, my actions actually led to some of this happening, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts on Darcy and Elizabeth's, like, individual kind of character development, or on their relationship? Because we did talk a little bit about that already.
I just love the banter between them, and I'm a banter person. Let me see if I have any. Nope, that's not right.
I think it's so funny how, like, Darcy reads it as, like, she's flirting with him, and Elizabeth is like, I hate this guy, get him out of here. But she's such a charming and funny person that it doesn't, like, he doesn't get that. Like, I mean, I think Darcy is, among other things, I think he's really bad at reading social cues.
most dudes are when it comes to women. How many times has a guy thought that a girl was flirting with him just because she deigned to have a conversation with him?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
which is kind of what happens here.
Yeah.
Like, Darcy just assumes that Elizabeth is like dying to marry him. He's like, you talked to me. Of course you want to marry a wealthy man.
I mean, who wouldn't? What was it? I read a book. It's called, I think you've read it too, Kara, but it's basically a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, starting from the first proposal, and Elizabeth accepts Darcy. I loved the way that I thought that was an interesting way to tell the story too.
Yeah, I think Unequal Affections is
Unequal
what it was
Affections,
called.
right? Because honestly, that made a lot more sense than her turning him down. I'm not gonna lie. For like a woman in that time period, I would have accepted.
That is a perfect segue into one of the other things I wrote down. So one thing I really want to talk about, because we've talked about how Pride and Prejudice is like this iconic work, and a lot of people tend to associate it with the romance, even though there's not actually a lot in the book. Like a lot of time goes to the subplots, what we would consider the subplots. So I want to talk to you about the more serious, like underlying issues that Pride and Prejudice deals with. So like the social commentary aspect. Like Margaret, you already mentioned that Lizzie turned down twice men who would have provided for her family, like basically for the rest of their lives. And like, I think sometimes even by people who are fans of Jane Austen, there's a tendency to write off Pride and Prejudice as being just like a fun rom-com. And I think the romantic aspects and the comedy aspects are great and I love them. But I think there's like a lot of subversive material kind of hidden under that, which I think I'm sure it was intentional. She's like, I can, if I cover it with this great banter-filled relationship, I can just like go to town on the class system. So anything that you guys wanted to talk about with that, I would love to hear what your thoughts were.
This time reading it, we all know that there's that famous opening sentence saying, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." And we forget this follow-up sentence, which is, "However little known the feelings or views of such a man." And it goes on to say, like, basically, whether or not he wants a wife, everyone decides that he is going to marry one of their daughters. And I was like, we always forget that, but that's what the novel is really about, is how people viewed marriage and relationships in that time. Like, I think she was absolutely right in turning Mr. Collins down, because he was, in fact, a horrible person.
I hate him so much.
I think everyone does. He's so skeevy and creepy. But I think that, I think Mrs. Richards-Reeds just said that she doesn't think some people realize how huge of a deal it is that Elizabeth turned down not one but two men. Like, that is a humongous deal in that time period, especially considering Darcy's fortune, because like one of them is just a clergyman, but the other dude is really rich.
Yeah, and not just that she turned them down, but that she did it because she was putting love and her own desires above making the financially smart choice. Like, that was pretty revolutionary still at the time. I agree. I think that's something that doesn't always get the attention that it deserves. Like, this is a huge deal. And also, it's like, the older I get, the more I understand why Mrs. Bennet does the things that she does. She's still obnoxious. Like, she would not be a fun person to have around. But her actions and her perspective kind of make the most sense. Like her daughters and her had no future if they didn't get married off well. And actually, like, as I start understanding Mrs. Bennet more, I start liking Mr. Bennet a lot less. Like, he's funny and he's entertaining to read about as a character. But for one thing, the fact that he just like blatantly favors Lizzie over all of his other children is kind of not great. And he doesn't seem to get that his bad choices led his family to be in this position. Like, he didn't save any money. He didn't make any plans for what would happen after he was dead. And then he gets annoyed with Mrs. Bennet, like, for trying to provide for their future. Like, she does it in a really bad way, but she is trying, like.
He's not doing anything to help.
He's not, yeah.
I think Mrs. Bennet's real like failing comes in her lack of discretion. Like, it's not wrong for her to be a little bit mercenary when it comes to her daughters, because back then that was a choice. They could marry rich or they were going to end up destitute.
Yeah.
I also love how Jane Austen just likes to go after the entail system in England. Like, she's just like, yeah, this isn't cool. Like, there's no way for these people to support themselves. Like, she makes a point that there's no way for these people to support themselves. They're going to have to depend on the generosity of strangers. Yeah. And it's funny because I think that Collins marrying Charlotte Lucas actually would have worked out more in their favor had none of the girls, because I don't see Charlotte turning out her, especially if she had somewhere to live, turning out her friends like they were expecting of her. Like, I think they have very little faith in Charlotte as a person, or Mrs. Bennet does.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I never really thought of that before. I always kind of assumed with the rest of the characters that she would like kick them all out when she got the house, but yeah, like that doesn't really fit in with what we know of her behavior before. Like, she's practical, but she's not a horrible person, you know?
Yeah. Like, I could see her parents doing that, especially because I just got where I am in the book this time around. I just got to the part where Charlotte's about to get married to Collins. But, like, Elizabeth is one of her best friends. I don't see her turning Elizabeth out like that. Like she, especially considering the fact that she's married to a clergyman, and he is, like, he's probably more likely to let that happen than she is.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. But I think she could also manipulate him and play on his good graces as a clergyman to be like, hey.
Yeah.
Maybe we
for
should
sure.
do this.
I think Charlotte is definitely going to be in charge of that relationship. Like,
oh, for sure.
Without
she
a doubt.
already is.
Yeah, there's not a doubt in my mind that Charlotte is going to whip him into shape.
Speaking of Charlotte too, she's also a character that I looked on really negatively when I first read the book at 16, because I was like, why couldn't you be principled like Lizzie? And wait, but like rereading it again, there's much more of an understanding of where she is, and if I were in her position, I would probably do the same thing.
Yeah. Taylor, I had like almost the same experience. Like, I always hated her, or even when I like didn't dislike her, I didn't understand her choices. Like, on an intellectual level, I did, because she really makes the most logical decision like in that whole situation. But it's like Mr. Collins just like repels me on every single level to the point where I'm like, why would you do this, Charlotte? Like, I understand, but I don't understand. And it wasn't really until I read, speaking of retellings, it wasn't until I read The Clergyman's Wife, which is a book that just came out at the end of last year, and it's like all about Charlotte and like her, basically what happens to her after she marries Mr. Collins. It wasn't until I read that I like really started appreciating Charlotte and like, okay, like I understand why you did what you did, and that actually takes like a lot of bravery, like taking that bullet, you know?
Yeah.
So,
she basically was like, well, he's not a terrible, like, awful person. He's not an axe murderer. He's a clergyman. So I'll have something to live on, and I'll figure out the rest of it. And I think she does a pretty good job. Like, I've always kind of understood Charlotte's point of view, but I also think that that's because, like, when my mom taught Pride and Prejudice at our co-op, because I was homeschooled, when she taught that, she mentioned, she was like, listen, like, her prospects as someone getting married at the age that she was at, they weren't great. Yeah. Like, she's 27. Which makes me feel really old if she's an old maid at 27, and I'm like 5 years past that.
Right. We're getting to the age where all the like old maid Jane Austen characters are younger than us. It's like, oh. Yeah. I think
I'm older than Anne Elliot at this point too, so.
But Anne Elliot found love, so.
Yeah.
She did. Anne Elliot found love before I did. This is an issue.
Yeah. And then also about the social commentary issue, like the fact of Elizabeth and Darcy ending up together, I think is also pretty not surprising necessarily. Like, they do make the point, like when Lady Catherine shows up to like try and talk Lizzie out of marrying him, and she's like not even engaged, but she's like, I'm not going to tell her that. Lady Catherine shows up to have her little like moment. Lizzie even makes the point that like they're not unequal. Like she's a gentleman's daughter and he's a gentleman, and like that would have been considered okay, which is true. Yeah. But I do think it would still have been kind of surprising, like the difference in socioeconomic status, like would have made this a really, like, I don't know. I think people in their village, when they heard about it, would have been like, whoa, like Lizzie did well for herself. So it's almost, it's like even just the fact of them ending up together is kind of a little bit subversive, you know?
Yeah, because I think, so I was supposed to read Pride and Prejudice for a class in college, but that ended up not happening, as college reading does. But I remember when we were discussing the book, we were talking about the difference between landed gentry and like the actual wealthy like class, because Mr. Darcy is upper class and Lizzie is landed gentry, but she doesn't really have any money. Yeah. And so while they might technically be on the same level as landed gentry, they're not or economically.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I should have said economically instead of socioeconomically. But
and I think that was a point that Austen was trying to make, that you don't have to, like, you can find people out of your socioeconomic class that are a better fit for you than people who are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. Let's see.
Naomi's Bookshelf had a really good point in the chat about marriage being viewed as a job.
Yes, let me pull that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, marriage was viewed as a job, so she found the best job that she could get. That's pretty much what happened.
That reminds me a lot. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, all I was going to say is, like, personally, I would have taken being a governess over marrying Mr. Collins, but, like, to each their own.
I would have taken a lot of things over being married to Mr. Collins, in theory. I know in practice I'd give in, but...
Right. Yeah.
But it reminds me a lot of, if you haven't seen the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, they sort of take that idea of marriage being a job to a sort of literal degree when it comes to Mr. Collins.
Yep.
Which I really liked, that sort of change and adaptation.
Yeah. I know. It's interesting that, like, in a way, some of the setup for Pride and Prejudice is something that doesn't translate to modern day. Like, I mean, thankfully, a lot of the, like, entails and all of that. But some of it is still, like, very current, you know? Like, we still deal with, I mean, like, the relationship stuff is, like, girls still feel, like, pressure to end up with, you know, people who their family wants them to, like, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, oh, one thing I wanted to ask you guys, especially since both of you have read or watched this before, like, we're all Pride and Prejudice veterans, is there any character or scene that stood out to you more this time? And we have talked a little bit about this, but is there anything else you guys want to talk about?
Let me see. I think that the thing that really stood out to me a little bit is that, like, I know she kind of meant Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's relationship to be a little bit of a warning and like a kind of like, hey, this is why you don't marry just because you can. Like, you think about who you're going to marry. But, like, you can definitely see that at least on Mr. Bennet's side, there is still some affection there. Like, he thinks his wife is an idiot, but he still loves her. Does that make sense?
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't remember what it was, but it was like just like somewhere at the beginning. I can't find it. I made a note. Mr. Bennet is just very much an introvert who didn't realize he was marrying an extrovert. Oh, there you go. It's like when he's talking about the girls, about like going to see Mr. Bingley, and he makes the point to say, like, you're still as pretty as the rest of our daughters. Like, that's not something someone who's not still kind of in love with his wife is going to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I think I've always been more pessimistic about their relationship. Like, I think you might be right. There might be still some affection there. For me, the reason I don't see that is because the fact that he does think she's an idiot, to me, overpowers any affection he might still have for her. You know, like, I think that's such a huge strike against their relationship. The fact that he, like, talks to her like she's an idiot and, like, just blatantly talks to other people about her being an idiot. To me, that's what kind of makes me view their relationship more as a warning. But I do think that's a good point, that there might still be some underlying affection there.
It's by no means a perfect marriage. And that's one of the things I actually like about the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie is that you get to see some of that in the movie between the two of them. Yeah. But I think like Mrs. Bennet most definitely is quite like she has good motivations, but she is really stupid. And like I think he's just that's his way of dealing with the fact that he ended up marrying a woman who was not his intellectual equal. And I think that's where they kind of come into issues. And he doesn't. I'm not saying he deals with it well. I think that's why he does it, because he's realized like he saw a pretty face and he didn't fall in love with her. Like he didn't think about the fact that she's really stupid.
Right. He made a stupid choice.
He played himself.
Yeah. That's actually one of the reasons I really like the black and white one too, is because there is like their relationship is a lot more enjoyable to watch, and it's not as true to the book because they have a much more positive relationship. But I think it's really sweet, so I don't mind it. Like, I don't mind that they changed it in that version. Like, they feel much more like intellectual equals, I think. Like, she's not as stupid in that movie. She still is what would be considered, like, vulgar at the time period, and she's, like, making a lot of mistakes when it comes to, like, actually trying to get her daughters married. But, I feel like they're on much more of an equal footing in that movie. So even though it's like not really how the book goes, I forgive it because it's more fun to watch.
Isn't the black and white one the one where they're all in like antebellum South costumes?
Yes, like because the Wind had come out the year before, and everyone was all about those antebellum Southern costumes.
Yes. I remember reading that. They're like, we're just going to set it in a different time period because we want to use these dresses again. Like.
That I have a lot of issues with that movie, but I don't mind the idea of Laurence Olivier as Mr. Darcy.
I do not mind at all, no.
I would say for me, what stood out as especially cute and charming and endearing in terms of Mr. Darcy is how much he wants Lizzie and Georgiana to be friends.
Yeah.
I think it's just so absolutely adorable. And I'm happy that they're friends at the end of the book.
Yeah, they are. And, like, I find Georgiana just, like, she's such a sweetheart, and she's kind of she's, like, the nicer, social, awkward version of Darcy. Like, she's equally as uncomfortable as him, but her, like, the way people view her is, like, she's sweet about it, so I think they don't mind as much. But, yeah, Georgiana is just, like, she's great. I really like her. And I love that her and Lizzie become friends and everything. And Lizzie kind of helps her, like, come out of her shell a little bit. I think it's really nice.
Yeah.
One thing I have been noticing, and this is, like, the last couple times I've read it, but, like, Caroline Bingley is an interesting character. Like, she's a bitch, and I don't like her because you're not supposed to. But in a weird way, I kind of see where she's coming from. It's like, if I were her, I would also be mad that this upstart poor girl, like, swept away, like, the man that I'd been, like, working on for so many years. Like,
I like the little evil hands for working.
Yes. Like, she's awful, but I'm also like, I see why you're mad. Like, you're not a good person and you don't deserve him, but, like, I get why you're mad.
Yeah.
I just think she's dumb, because if she's known him as long as she has and he hasn't made a move, like, honey, he's not into you.
He's not. Yeah, I know.
Also, her ways of, like, getting Mr. Darcy, or at least trying to turn his attention from Elizabeth, are really not great at all.
They're so stupid.
They're turning attention to Elizabeth.
Yeah. Yeah. She's not so great at flirting.
Stop bringing her up.
Yep. Yeah. Girl hate is not a cute look on anyone, no matter the time period.
It's not. It's really not. Let's see.
Anything else?
Yeah, please, if you guys have any other, like, things you want to talk about too.
We can talk about Wickham.
We could. Let's
we have to.
You know, though, coming from Sense and Sensibility, I will say Wickham is 1,000 times better than Willoughby, just because he's not Willoughby.
Yeah, I know. I think, like, Willoughby is, like, the bottom of the barrel for me of, like, Austen villains. Like, Wickham, by comparison, is, like, not that bad.
Yeah. He's also... Go ahead, finish.
I was going to say, like, he's still bad, but I think I don't hate reading about him quite as much because we know that he was stopped before he did what Willoughby would have done, or what Willoughby did do. So it's not like through any merit of his own that I like him better, but it's like I don't hate reading you quite as much as Willoughby because they stopped you in time. Like,
well, it's interesting because if you've ever watched any of Katie from Books and Things videos on Jane Austen, she did a whole thing on Willoughby, and she talks about the fact that, like, even though he is a villain, he's actually one of the most nuanced and complex villains that you see in Jane Austen books, because like you actually get real motivation and the fact that he's conflicted over what he's doing, whereas Wickham's just like, yeah, well, I was into you, but like I need money, and then I just was trying to get back at Darcy, so I went after your sister, or whatever that is. Like he just does stuff, and Willoughby is actually like sorry for the things he's done. So
yeah, except he's not sorry for the, like, Willoughby, I don't think is actually sorry for what he did, like, to Eliza and everything. I think he's sorry that it hindered his chances with Marianne. And I think that he does genuinely love Marianne, and, like, he's sorry about leading her on. But I don't actually think that I personally don't think that he feels bad about what he did to Eliza, like, at all.
No, obviously not. She was just a servant girl. So, like, that's obvious. But, like, Wickham is just skeevy to me because I didn't realize this until, speaking of things that stood out, he's the same age as Darcy.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't make that connection until this time around. I've always thought of Wickham being several years younger, like being more closer to Elizabeth's age than Darcy's. But then, like, reading it this time, I was like, oh, they grew up together. So obviously, they are friends and they are the same age. And I was like, whoa. I think that, like, I hate Wickham more because he intentionally set out to use Georgiana to get back at someone. Like, he set out to molest a teenager because he was pissed at her brother. And that makes him, like, 10 times worse to me.
Yeah, I put him about, like, that interaction, I put that at about the level of Willoughby, who was like, I'm bored, and, like, who are you going to go to for help? Like, I'm just, because she was also, I think, around 15. Right, Eliza? I don't remember.
I don't know. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure that she was a kid.
Eliza was a teenager.
Yeah, to me, like, because it's true that Willoughby wasn't, like, doing that to get back at somebody, but to me, like, the apathy he felt is as bad as doing it for revenge. At least to me.
I'm just so like the guy being like that.
The consequences for Eliza are going to be much more severe than they were for Georgiana and Lydia. Like, at the end of the day, Lydia got married. It was all scandalous, but she got married. Georgiana was saved from any sort of social humiliation. Eliza's life is ruined.
Yeah.
Because he got her pregnant and then left.
Yeah. So let's talk about Lydia a little bit.
I can't stand her.
Jocelyn and Yvette both are a fan.
Jocelyn, I apologize in advance. Lydia is my least favorite character, one of my least favorite characters in the book. Like, she's like this much higher up than Wickham because she's just so annoying and stupid and self-centered. I don't like self-centered characters for the most part. Like,
I think, like, my feelings on Lydia are very conflicted because she can be frustrating in that, like, she does not understand that her actions have consequences. But she's a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, like, it bothers me that, okay, so, like, her choices also put her sister's future in danger, which I think is one of the reasons that for a long time I really didn't like Lydia, is because it's like, I still feel bad about what happened to her. Like, she doesn't deserve Wickham, God forbid. But I think one of the reasons
Amy March is like 10 times better than Lydia is. I'm sorry. Amy March does not deserve that slander. Anyways, continue.
What? Oh, I hate Amy March, so this is going to be but yeah, so, like, I think one of the reasons I had a hard time sympathizing with Lydia for a long time is because I'm like, you put your sisters in danger because you would not understand that your choices affect other people. But I also think, like, nobody ever really told her why what she was doing was wrong. Like, they grew up just knowing that like, you shouldn't, like, you can't, live with a man before you're married and all this, but nobody ever actually told her, like, about the consequences, or at least we didn't see that. So I kind of understand why, like, I don't know, I don't get the feeling she, like, fully knew what she was agreeing to. I mean, besides the fact that she's 15 and, like, that's not consent, but yeah.
That's not why I dislike Lydia. Like, like the fact that she ran off with Wickham and all that has like I feel sorry for her about that, because she definitely was used. She was manipulated. Like that's some like Ruth kind of level stuff there. My problem with Lydia is how self-centered she is and how little she thinks about the way her actions affect other people.
Yeah.
And so she never ceases to irk me. And I do understand that she is 15. But I've known 12-year-olds that have a better understanding of how their actions affect other people than she does. So I like that's my thing, is that she doesn't care if she hurts other people, and that's what really bothers me about her.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also don't like that about her. I think one of the reasons I don't hate her so much in the beginning is like, even though she's super rude to people, she's usually rude to people that I don't like. So like the fact that she gets in trouble for like talking badly about Mr. Collins, I'm like, you go, Lydia. Someone should have said it. Like,
yeah, I think my thing with Lydia is that at the end of the day, no one ever really told her or punished her for her terrible behavior. Mm-hmm. And even when after she, like, everything has been patched up for her, she ran away with Wickham. They hurried up and got her married. And then her mom is like congratulating her and pretending like she had never done anything wrong. And you can assume that this has happened her entire life. So have you ever seen those teenagers on My Super Sweet 16? At the end of the day, it's on their parents because they're so young, and it's not on them because they don't know any better. So like Lydia is annoying, but I feel really bad for her.
Yeah. And Yvette had a great point, which Taylor, you also touched on, that like her mother really encouraged all of her bad behavior. Like Lizzie was her dad's favorite and Lydia was her mother's. Well, Lydia and Jane were her mother's favorites. So like she just gave her everything she wanted the second that she wanted it. So it's like, that's not a good way for somebody to learn responsibility or like consequences.
No, it's not.
But yeah, it does.
There are people who do. So,
right, I know, and
like,
that's
Jane and Lizzie.
Yeah, and even like Kitty, who had kind of a similarly, I guess, lawless upbringing. Like she doesn't. I don't get the feeling that Kitty would have done the things that Lydia did, but yeah, I don't know. Lydia's an interesting case study, I guess.
Lydia likes to see what she can get away with. I feel like
which is everything, basically.
So
like she's a 15-year-old.
I was never like that at 15. I was more responsible at 15 than I am now. So
I agree with that.
I was also a very responsible 15-year-old, so I can relate.
Like, I had myself for a bad grade at 15. I grounded myself for a bad grade at 15. I got a C on my test. I told my parents, and I was like, "Don't worry, I'll take myself to my room." And I just sat there.
A C is not a bad grade, though.
I thought it was.
I also, I would have. Jocelyn also said, let's see, let me pull up the comment, that Kitty feels like an introvert who's okay with being forgotten, but Lydia is an extrovert who needs attention like every youngest child.
I agree with the second part. I disagree with the first part because Kitty definitely, especially when Lydia gets to go with the soldiers, Kitty pitches a fit.
Yeah.
If y'all remember.
Yeah. I also like, I don't know how I feel about the idea that like Lydia's an extrovert, so some of it is to be expected. Like you're still responsible for your actions if you, like, I don't know. I don't think like her being an extrovert excuses all the things that she's willing to do to get attention, but I think like the difference in their personality does definitely contribute to it.
Yeah. And she definitely is the stronger of the two personalities. So
yes. Yeah, I know. Poor Kitty is like, nobody remembers she's there.
That's funny. Poor Mary, too. I feel bad for Mary to some extent. Like, she's stupid, but, like, I feel like everyone ignores her. That makes sense. Like, Lydia's a baby. She gets all that attention.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, I just feel, I feel so bad for her because the book even says, like, she's the only ugly one in the family. So she learned to play piano. And it's like, nobody even lets her play piano most of the time. Like, I just feel really bad for her. I mean, even Lizzie and Jane, like, don't pay any attention to her, really.
I thought I read somewhere that Mary did end up getting married though, and that Kitty was the spinster Bennett.
Oh, interesting.
Like Jane Austen had apparently confirmed that, but that could be wrong. I haven't confirmed that source, but I do kind of like that idea if it's true.
Yeah, I love hearing those like stories of like Jane Austen, like Cassandra, her sister especially, would like write her like, I would have liked this ending better. Like there's one from Mansfield Park that I'm not going to talk about until we read it because it might spoil some things, but I just find it hilarious that people were having like fandom wars like hundreds of years ago. Like
humanity does not change, guys.
It really doesn't.
No.
The Bennetts gave up on parenting by the time they had the younger three.
True. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I feel like they just got so lucky with Elizabeth and Jane, they figured that the younger three would parent themselves, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really what it feels like.
That's funny.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Naomi says that Jane Austen told her family that Mary married her uncle's clerk. I do remember that now. That does sound familiar.
Good for her.
Yeah. I hope Mary was happy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Jane Austen does make a point that, like, Mary gets more attention once I think she's the one.
Yeah.
Once Kitty goes to live with Elizabeth and Darcy, she gets more attention and therefore gets to go out more in society.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I know. I'm glad we get that little epilogue where it's like, Mary's doing well. And Kitty, too.
Yeah.
Let's see. Before we talk about like favorite scenes or favorite lines or like anything else you guys want to cover, before I forget, I want to talk about our next live show and when that's going to be. We haven't officially confirmed it with our guests, but if we follow the pattern that we've been doing, except for this month, which was a little different because of scheduling issues, if we follow the pattern that we've been doing, it would probably be Sunday, May 3rd for Mansfield Park. So just kind of keep that date in mind, but definitely watch the Austen Anonymous Twitter account for confirmation of that and for the specific time. I just wanted to say that before I forgot. Okay, so
sorry, I wanted to throw out a quick thanks to Hannah from Lynn Hermione for keeping the Instagram.
Yes, thank you, Hannah.
Hopefully this month I will be more active on the Austen and on Twitter. Sorry, I've been kind of absent. I work for a news publication, so we have been very busy recently.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. So hopefully I'll be able to keep up with that more. So I'm going to apologize for that.
You're excused, Taylor. I think you've got a pretty good reason. I mean, yeah, all of just like scheduling in general has been very interesting lately with everything going on.
Yeah.
Okay. So any like final things that you guys want to talk about, like favorite parts, favorite characters, favorite quotes, whatever. This is like the catch-all. Whatever you guys want to talk about.
This is a weird one because I don't actually have like a favorite moment in the book. I really do like the second proposal and the fact that he's like, hey, just so you know, like I did all like I like the fact that the stuff that Darcy does. My favorite moment in the movies though has got to be the 2005 Pride and Prejudice when she gets the letter and just like walks out and bursts out sobbing and then walks back in that room. Like that gets me every time. Like it's so funny. But it's weird because I love this book, but I don't have like a moment that I'm like, yes, that's my favorite moment in this entire book.
Yeah. About like the second proposal, I was only thinking about this today. I've never noticed it before, but this book kind of does a trope that I normally don't like, which is that one character falls in love with the other one way before, and then you're kind of like the rest of the book is like the other person catching up. I almost never like that, but that's kind of what happens. Like Darcy is in love.
I love that trope.
I don't, and I still love this book. So like that was kind of a fun like thing. I mean, clearly Jane Austen just like transcends my like likes and dislikes. Like she can do anything in a way that I like it.
Yeah.
I think part of it is that it's done well. Like it's not like, because I think when you have those kinds of tropes where like one of them is in love with the other way before the other person, a lot of the time what happens is one of them comes off extremely annoying and pushy.
Yes.
And in this, Darcy is just like, okay, because he's an introvert. He's like, I'm going to be in love with you from afar and suffer. We'll be fine, and I'm just going to make sure that you're taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like really good at giving her space. Like even like the second proposal, he's basically like, if you tell me to stop talking about this, I will never bother you again about my feelings. Like,
he only says it because she brings it up. Like,
yeah.
He's like, I want you to know that, like he wants to be honest with her. And I think that's part of why it works is he's like, listen, like, you should probably know that the reason I actually did this was not to help your family or because, like, it was partly because I felt guilty about Wickham, but, like, the real reason I did this was because I wanted, like, things to be okay for you.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of got the idea that he wanted her to still be able to have a good marriage and that kind of thing. Also, even if it wasn't with him.
Ms. Richards-Reeves pointed out that Jane Austen is kind of the OG for that trope, and it's like, she's good at pining, yeah.
Yeah.
I think actually one of my favorite lines is something that I haven't seen in any adaptation that I've ever seen, which makes me sad because I think it's hilarious. It's like right at the end where Lizzie is like, oh God, I have to tell my dad I'm marrying this guy I've been trash talking. Like 3 months, probably more than that. And so that part is really
a year,
funny.
I think.
Oh yeah, it's a year at that point. So it's really funny. And then after that, it gets even funnier because she tells him like that Darcy was the one who like saved Lydia and all of this. And he's like, are you kidding? This is great. And she's like, why is this great? And he's like, basically, like, I can just offer to pay him and he'll like rage and storm about his love for you. And then I'll never have to pay him. I find that just like the funniest thing. And it makes me sad that it's never been in an adaptation.
Yeah.
That is so funny.
I know we've complained about Mr. Bennet in this live show, but I do quite like him.
He's so funny. I know. Like, as a person, he's kind of trash. Like, he's a terrible parent. But as a character, he's really funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, he brings a lot to the book.
So my favorite quote is, like, we've talked a lot about Pride and Prejudice not being overtly romantic, but of course I happen to settle on the quote that is probably the most romantic in the book. But I loved it since the first time I read it. But it's, I cannot fix on the hour or the spot or the look or the words which laid the foundation. It is too long ago. I was in the middle before I knew that I had begun. And I'm so good.
It's so good. I know.
It solidified Darcy as like the second sexiest Austen man for me.
He's so great. I know. I love him. And I feel like it's not just like, oh, the brooding guy who like changes for you, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think he genuinely would be a really good partner. Like, I don't know. He'd be very very attentive. Like, I feel like him and Lizzie would really balance each other well. Like, it's not just like the swoon worthiness, although he is. Like, I feel like he would just be like a really great guy to be involved with.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the money doesn't hurt at all.
It doesn't hurt. Yeah. What does Lizzie say to Jane? Like, take care to fall in love with a man of good fortune.
See, I feel like that's probably part of why I would have like accepted Darcy if I was Elizabeth, is because the older sibling mentality that I've got to take care of my family would have kicked in and been like, okay, if I marry this dude, I can take care of everyone else. They'll be okay. I can suffer if they'll be okay.
Yeah.
that older sibling mentality, which Lizzie probably doesn't have because she's not the oldest, but like me as the oldest sibling.
Yeah, I feel like Jane would 100% have done that. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, she probably would have.
Yeah.
That would have been funny.
Okay. So, any last minute thoughts before we wrap this up?
No. I think we covered everything.
We covered a lot, yeah.
Yes, we did.
Let's see, I'm just scrolling through, and I think I did cover everything that I wanted to talk about. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So we're like right at an hour. I'm really proud of us. thank you to everybody who joined us, who tuned in. We really enjoyed discussing with you guys and reading your comments. Thank you to our guest, Margaret, for gushing over Pride and Prejudice with us. And, of course, thank you to Taylor, my co-host. Both of these lovely people will be linked in the description. I think I already did that before we started. I was trying to plan ahead this time. So definitely go and check them out. And yeah, like I said, keep an eye on the Austen Anonymous Twitter account for updates about when our next live show will be, possibly May 3rd. But we have to talk to our other guests. And I think that is everything. I hope all of you guys are staying safe and doing well. We really wanted to, and sorry for the late notice, but we really wanted to do the Pride and Prejudice live show because I think that we all need some comfort read right now. Yep. And at least for the three of us, this is definitely a comfort food kind of book. Yes, so we hope that you guys enjoyed it too. And that's going to be everything. So see you guys next time, and thank you again.
Bye.
Bye. End broadcast.